Hey everyone, welcome to the Hot Drinks Podcast. I'm your host, Shawn Stratton. Each week I sit down with an outdoor educator to hear some of their best stories leading students on wilderness expeditions around the world. This week we changed things up a little bit. I am the one actually being interviewed. Recently, while I was out in Western Canada on vacation, I stopped in to Sarah Harvey's home and she took a moment to interview me. You might recall Sarah was a past guest of the podcast. She is a fellow NOLS instructor, still currently working the odd NOLS course. And she'd offered to sit down and interview me on a few of my stories. I have had some requests over the last few months to hear some of my stories, not just from my kids, but from our listeners as well. So Sarah was gracious enough to take some time to interview me on one of my larger adventures, as well as ask a few questions about the podcast and a bit of a history on that. So that's what this episode is all about. I guess it's all about me, Shawn Stratton here, the host. It was a little different and awkward at times being interviewed for my own podcast. It was actually the first sit-down face-to-face interview that we've done with podcast, which obviously happened to be me, Sarah, asking the questions, but I'm very, very grateful for Sarah for taking the time and interest to interview me on these stories. I do have a few other former guests lined up to interview me on a few more stories. I certainly have no shortage of them and would like to share them with you in the best possible manner so that they are entertaining and share a little bit about things behind the scenes that I would probably skim over if I just came on and shared a story. So it is nice being interviewed and asked to go in detail on some areas that I may skim over. And Sarah does a great job with that. So without further ado, we'll jump into the interview. But actually, before we get to the interview, once again, want to remind you, please leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts if you are enjoying the show. It would be a great help. I really appreciate all the ratings we've gotten. I think we're up to 56 5-star ratings at this point, and the reviews are awesome. I love to hear your feedback. So please take a moment, write a review, and of course, subscribe to the podcast and share it with anybody you think may enjoy it. All right, I'll leave it there. Here is my interview from Sarah Harvey on my epic canoe expedition in Alaska, which was the end of a NOLS 3-month semester. Enjoy. Welcome to the Hot Drinks Podcast. We've changed things up here today. Today we have a guest host, Sarah Harvey. I'm thrilled to have you here as a guest host today.
Yeah, it's super fun. And also this is your first in-person podcast.
First in-person?
COVID and the wandering nature of the people we know.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great to be here. We are in Canmore at Sarah's home. She is hosting the podcast today. Not only hosting it, but she's hosting us physically. It's nice to be out of Ottawa and traveling a bit. We're here on summer vacation with the family and decided to chop in, and Sarah was gracious enough to host us. And we talked a few months ago when I had Sarah on about doing some stories and asking me some story questions about our stories, and so now this is a great opportunity. So I'm a little nervous to see what kind of questions she's going to ask me, but I'm excited to get into it and share some stories that I maybe hinted about a bit on the podcast, but haven't dove into yet. So, I'm just going to hand it right over to Sarah and you take it away.
Okay, well, it's awesome to have you back in Canmore, back in the Bow Valley where we first met. So right. Cool, full circle. And I feel like I got the cheater's edition because I read Shawn's book, Teams on the Edge, which is an awesome read if you haven't already read it. And there's a great window into some of these stories. So I have a bit of an agenda today, but feel free to take it wherever you want to go. All right. Okay, we'll start with the traditional question. And what's your favorite hot drink?
All right. My favorite hot drink there's really only one hot drink as far as I'm concerned, and that's cocoa. That's hot chocolate. And, I didn't realize how much hot chocolate I drank on courses until I stopped working for NOLS and stopped getting out of the field. And now I think, how did my teeth survive the amount of hot chocolate that I had? But yeah, always hot chocolate. Always try to bring extra. Always looking for the best hot chocolate. Sometimes had supplemental fancy hot chocolate, but any which way.
How many pounds do you think you're consuming per ration?
Oh, I don't know, but whatever they gave you, I was in and more. Sometimes you could like substitute out things.
Yes.
It's like, let's leave all those tea bags and add another pound of hot chocolate. Like, anything I could do to get more hot chocolate, barter off the students, whatever you could do. Every which way. Peanut butter adding was the best on the cold days, but it's just something now. You go camping now. It's like you need to have that.
Do you drink it at home?
It's special, like not special, but it's on a cold ski day.
Yeah,
we might make some, but if I had that much at home, then the kids on it. If I have to make it, I have to hide it. Got to put it in a coffee mug and put the lid on it so they don't know it's something they could actually have themselves. But
and did your co-instructors ever try and convert you to coffee? Any good stories there?
Yeah, so Coco the whole time. No, did anybody convince me to drink coffee? No, I don't even know if I've tried it. I don't know. I remember trying it probably in high school.
Yeah,
my parents or something, but I've never had it. And I think most NOLS instructors are so protective of their coffee that they're pretty happy when no one else is taking it. I've tried to make it a few times, trying to be that EB instructor and have it ready for you when you get up in the morning. But again, a lot of people are pretty protective, not only about their coffee, but the technique of making it. So
it's true. You do not want to mess up someone's morning coffee.
Yeah. Well, and I would teach how many scoops of hot chocolate you could have in my hot chocolate. That was all I needed, was like get the right amount of scoops, because I like to kind of, people would say, you like to chew it.
So you're not big on, I call it gas station hot chocolate, where it's super watery?
Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, that's the end. Some gas station hot chocolate, though, is pretty good.
Oh,
so
okay.
You got to get it if it's at like the new bag in the machine. Yeah. But
clearly a refined skill over the years.
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes someone added peppermint tea bag to hot chocolate.
Oh yeah, that is very good.
Yeah, that was good.
Yeah. Well, if it wasn't 30 degrees out and super smoky right now, I would have made you a hot chocolate. Yeah. Well, I am really looking forward to hearing about you proctoring in Alaska, and specifically the final section where you were on the canoe trip. And NOLS doesn't really work in that area anymore, so I'm especially curious about. We do sections of the Yukon River in the Yukon still, but not in Alaska. So I'm extra curious.
Not in Yukon either now.
Right. Sadly, that is true. Yeah.
Yeah. So this trip, it was, it was proctoring. So I was working all 3 sections of the semester in Alaska. It was, my dream. I'd always wanted to proctor from when I started working with NOLS. I love the longer courses and I love the multi-element courses, working different field types. So that was sea kayaking, backpacking, and canoeing. All 3 of which I had been checked off to work, and so I was comfortable in them. A lot of times proctoring, there might be a third section that you're not comfortable. Like when I proctored in Baja, I was not a sailor, but I got to learn sailing with my students, which was great. So we did backpacking first, I believe in the Talkeetnas, and then we went sea kayaking in Prince William Sound, and then we were heading back to the base in Palmer, and we're going to go canoeing close to the Arctic, north of Fairbanks. And I didn't really know anything about the canoe trip before I left on the other sections. I knew we were just going to be canoeing. I knew I was going to be doing it with Travis Holmes, who I had just worked with that winter in Mexico. So we were friends, and I was excited to see him and was excited to see this course area. And I'm not sure if I believe I was told it was a route that was just scouted, but had never been partially scouted, but had never been run by a NOLS course. And they're just looking for new course areas to do whitewater canoeing. And we came off the sea kayak trip and got up to the branch, and I met up with Travis. And I remember one of the first things he said, he had all these maps laid out, and he's like, I think we're going to have to sell this trip a bit.
Tough start. Okay,
yeah. I was like, why is that? He's like, I'm not sure how much whitewater there is, and it might be long and meandering like a canal, but I'm not sure. And and so this area, this trip was starting. It was north of Fairbanks. It was on the Beaver Creek, and Beaver Creek flows into the Yukon River. And so we were going to get dropped off on this real small tributary to Beaver Creek, and then it gets bigger, and then we do Beaver Creek, and then the Yukon, like the last 5 days or so, we paddled down the Yukon River. And but Beaver Creek didn't look like it had a lot of grading. It looked like the area was like a 500 square mile bog. And this was like just a meandering river, like tons and tons of S-turns, so many S-turns. And but there was a few mountains nearby, so we figured we'd do some day hikes and try to jazz it up a bit with them, just fishing and whatnot. And jump in with questions as you want.
Yeah, I was just thinking, we all know that bog translates to mosquito breeding ground.
Yes, yes, exactly. But definitely mosquito breeding ground. And so we were thinking, like, this is going to be potentially a pretty kind of boring trip. We just came off an amazing section from Swing Sound, whales and bald eagles and tons of wildlife and glaciers, calving glaciers, icebergs, bergy bits. And so we got off and he's like, we're going to go up there into this bog and paddle this flat river.
And it sounded like you had a competent group as well, and they were motivated to be there, and they were looking for a challenge.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, the group was great. Again, we'd already been out, probably 50 odd days at this point. Mm-hmm. And yeah, like, let's go. Let's see what we can do. Let's, have a great time out there, and maybe even transfer even more leadership probably earlier on to heighten that up as well, because that always adds time and excitement. And so we get out there, and I remember the water was pretty low to start on this little tributary, and we head off, kind of teaching on the fly as you do the first few days on a river trip up there, of like, okay, let's teach you enough to like get down these basic rapids and get to camp.
So there was a little bit of white water?
There was a little bit at the beginning.
Okay. Yeah.
Not too much, but enough for them to be, on edge
a
little bit. And I guess it was a few days in. I'm not sure exactly what day it was. We got in, the river got a bit bigger, and we managed to get into where there was a bit of a mountain range, and we decided to do a day trip and go for a hike up to the mountain. It's good to get out and stretch the legs on these canoe trips every few days.
And be reminded of the big picture.
Yeah, exactly, and get a view and all that. And so there was a nearby peak that we were going to go climb together as a group, and so much things started happening. So we went up on this peak, and on the way up, hiking up this peak, we noticed something kind of shimmering off in the distance, kind of on the other side, not around the corner of the mountain, but on the other side of the mountain that we could still see. And it almost looked like it might have been a miner's stake, like it might be a metal rod or something that they'd put in the ground. Because I've hiked in the Ogilvies and Tombstones in the Yukon, and there's a fair number of mining stakes there. Some are really old, but they're not abnormal to see them. So I was like, I couldn't figure out what it must be that. So anyway, went up our kind of route up this path, up to this peak. And on the way down, it's like a few of them were like, hey, who wants to check out that flashy thing on the other side of the mountain?
Yeah.
So I took a small group, and they were pretty excited, and they ran ahead, and we got down there. And as I was like getting down there, this thing looks really big. And I got closer and realized it was a missile.
Have you ever seen a missile in real life before that moment? Yeah.
No, I couldn't believe it. I was like, what is a missile doing here? And they were scared to death. The students, they were like, no, don't touch it. Don't go near it. Don't touch it. And I was like, nothing's going to happen to this missile. It's been here probably a while. It didn't look that old. It didn't look like it was from the 50s or anything. But so I gave it a little knock, and nothing happened, but they were all really scared. And yeah, we just checked it all over. We're looking for any kind of markings on it at all. And this thing was like straight up and down in the ground. It's probably 10 feet tall. Yeah, it was like it fell out of the sky and was straight into the ground.
And what did the ground look like around it?
Yeah, it was, the side of like an alpine slope. It might even have been a bit of scree.
But undisturbed.
Yeah, undisturbed. It was just like straight in there.
There were no crack lines as if it had spread or ricocheted.
Yeah, it was just straight in the ground, like you're shooting a bow and arrow at a target.
Wow,
and so we checked it out, and there was no markings. And I found like one serial number on one of the wings, had like 4 wings sticking out. It was about 10 feet tall. And I was like, do I break up a satellite phone and call the police, tell them there's a missile here? Do I call National Defense? Like, do I make this a thing? Or do we just like forget about it and carry on? And pretty soon we got distracted with other things. So yeah, we took our pictures and had a bunch of fun with the missile. And I really had no idea where it could have come from, but we soon forgot about that, because as we headed back down to the beach where the gravel bar where our tents were, as we got closer, we could see that there was we could only see 3 of our 4 tents, or maybe 4 of our 5 tents. And I'm like, oh, that's strange. Figured maybe one was like tucked into the other one. You couldn't really see it that well from up above. And as we got closer and closer, we realized that like all the tents were there, but one of the tents was completely flat. And, we cleaned up our camp and left it bomb-proof and went on our hike. And our food was, 100 meters or 200 meters downstream, just neatly put away in dry bags. There wasn't really trees high enough to hang and things up there. And we got down, and as we got to our tents, we realized that another tent was kind of leaning over and had a pole like sticking out of it. And then all the tents had like tears in them. And so we were like, what is going on here?
And you're all kind of approaching as a group. You were all together. Okay.
Yeah, well, actually, there might have been a group that had been there first, because I was with the group that was checking out the Missle.
Okay.
And so we probably got down within probably 15 minutes of each other.
Were you wondering if another missile had hit your camp?
Yeah, right. It was kind of like a missile. And what made us realize what it was, we had the mountain hardware, classic mountain hardware tents that we had for years in Alaska. And the windows in the top, you could see it had been ripped open, and you could see like the claw print almost of like where it had ripped. It looked like it was jagged edges, as if like a claw went through. And we're like, no way, like a bear went through here? And basically a bear demolished all our tents. It's like they played trampoline on them. The way it looks like they jumped up and down on them, or ran around them, or I don't know what they were doing on them. But so one tent was like, had 2 broken poles. Another one had 1 broken pole, and all the other ones had tears in them at some point in like the fly and some of the whole body. A couple had their thermarests were bitten into and pulled out. And some rubber boots were bitten into. I'm trying to remember what other gear, but he didn't leave a lot untouched.
I have never seen, or, I've heard of, say, fishing camps where bears kind of loot the place for food.
Right.
But I've never heard of anything like that on a NOLS course.
It doesn't make sense. We tell the students not to have any food in their tents. And like instructor tent, we didn't have any smellies or anything. Like, I wouldn't have been shocked if the students had some wrappers or something in there, but to go after every tent like that, it was bizarre. And so then that was what we saw first. We got there, did a quick assessment, and I'm like, our food, if our tents are like this, I'm wondering what is our food like? And this is probably day 4 of our day, 25 days. And
you bring all your
and we don't have any re-rations. This is everything.
Trip. Yeah.
And so we quickly run down the beach to check out our food, and it's not touched. Nothing's touched in there. We're like, no way, this is crazy.
And it didn't even look like the bear had tried to get into it.
He didn't. Probably didn't even go down that far. Wow. There were no signs of it out there. And so we just did a full assessment. Okay, let's see what gear is broken. Let's divide over there and divide that. And then we just went into tent repair central. We set up, it felt like we were setting up a little mini factory of tent repair. And so we kind of collapsed all the tents, and we did an assessment. So we had poles, flies, and bodies of the tent.
Not humans.
The body of the tent. And we separated them, and then we just went into repair mode. We broke it. Luckily on a canoe trip, you bring a bit more substantial repair kit than you would bring backpacking or even sea kayaking. And so we had, probably a full roll of duct tape and probably several different things of seam seal.
Good old speedy stitcher.
That's right. Yeah, the not so speedy stitcher.
Yeah.
Yeah, we definitely had that. And we usually have one maybe pole splint in our repair kits. I'm not sure if we had 2, but I think what we did, we ended up sacrificing 1 pole and using that as splints for the other poles.
Yep.
I think we did that, or I'm not sure if we ended up restringing some poles. And basically, each instructor, it was only being Travis, but we basically divided up. And then before you use duct tape, you had to get approval. It's I'm going to use this duct tape on this one, because some holes could use duct tape, some holes needed seam grip, some holes needed patching. So we were like sacrificing some sleeping bag stuff sacks or whatever, food stuff sacks or to use as patches on the tents, using seam grip on the rubber boots to like patch them. And
in that moment, were you thinking, okay, we can recover all the tents, or were you thinking, okay, we're hosed? What was your thought process?
My initial thought, I remember like looking around the beach, I'm like, they could get a plane here. Like we get a bush plane here. Like, I was like, come on, Travis, let's just call the branch. Like, and if not, maybe they could airdrop them, like pop a few tents out the back door of a small plane. Because we work a lot with the bush planes up there, and a lot of those guys will land just about anywhere.
Yes, it is amazing.
And so that was my first initial thought. And luckily, like Travis was, I think he kind of like got excited about this and was like, no, let's see what we can do. Let's see what we can do here, without having to call the branch and call the mothership and get help. And we did an amazing job. We patched together. I think every tent had 4 poles. One tent had 3 poles. I think that was probably ours, and so that was a bit limp, but it still stayed up. And I think we had our thermoflies, to usually cook under. Well, I think those tarps went over the tents because we weren't too confident on our patching. Because if it up rains, there, and it rains. It rains a lot up there. Unfortunately, we didn't have too much rain, but we definitely had days. So we put basically the tarps over the tents and carried on.
I imagine we're going to circle back to that missing pole later, as I know where the story is headed.
Yeah.
The one thing I'm curious about, though, I saw a picture of, you said what you suspect was the bear in the book, and I thought that was pretty bold, just to saunter on by later, kind of like, ha. Yeah. But also, it didn't look like that big of a bear.
No, and it was a fair distance when we took the picture, but it was a black bear that we saw. Like, we assumed that was the bear, and it was down the shore a ways. When we saw that was probably 10 o'clock at night. Again, now it doesn't get dark until almost midnight there.
And was it checking you out? Was it minding its own business?
It was kind of minding its own business. He kind of looked down enough, obviously, to grab a couple pictures. But it was probably 300 or 400 meters away. And we did think, like maybe we got to pack up after all of this. But we needed to have our stuff up because it needed to dry. All the seam seal needed to dry. Yeah. So we're like, we can't really take it down now. Everything's going to be stuck together and then totally ruined. And so I remember that night we decided to build a big fire, and then everybody was going to sleep by the fire.
Oh, that is a bold move up there to sleep outside.
And then the mosquitoes were bad. Everybody had their bug nets on. I think maybe we didn't have a fire, and then the mosquitoes were bad. We decided to build a fire. And then,
I think you said in the book that 3 a.m. or something, a couple students just started a bonfire for survival.
That's what it was. Yeah. And actually, before the bonfire, we were sleeping under a canoe poly. Remember those?
Good old canoe polys. I haven't built one in years.
Yeah, I couldn't believe I remembered it. So Sarah and I used to work at the same camp Chief Factory together, and that's what they do on canoe trips. Is they get their 4 canoes as a frame, and then you put tarps, or even 5 canoes. 2 canoes in a frame, 2 canoes, and then one over the middle, and use that as a tarp and put your tarps on top of it. And so we did that. I thought that might try to keep some mosquitoes out. I don't know. Or at least it was going to keep us dry.
Yeah. They keep you dry. I actually think I learned over the years that it just turns out it traps the bugs in it. Yeah,
exactly. So it was a very
sleepless
night. Yeah, it was very sleepless. And I remember the next day, I'm like, I better get some sleep tonight. So the next day we packed up and moved on. And so, we forgot about the Missle.
Just to give people an idea up there, if you haven't spent time up there in terms of the bugs, especially in those boggy areas, I mean, you set your hand out, your bare hand, and within 10 seconds, you cannot see your skin. It is covered in mosquitoes, and they are actively biting you.
So it gets so bad. So we managed to do that, and we didn't have to call anybody, and we carried on, and it was a bit of a pride thing then for the course to be like, we're self-sufficient, we can fix our own issues out here. And so I think we all learned something from that, just like, don't be so quick to call. And, not too many years earlier, there were no satellite phones to call anyway. You would have to make do. And so, we headed on down the river, and another couple days we started into this kind of the real flat section, almost like an estuary. It's just really slow, tons of bends, tons of S-turns. it was zigzagging so much that we were trying to count the turns to know where we were on the map. It's hard to find because once we got into this bog area, this 500 square mile bog area, there's no features, there's no mountains.
No big landmarks.
There's no topography to go off of. And so almost all you have is to count your bends. And every now and then you might come across, like, there was a few, not many, but there was a few like fishing camps and stuff down there that it might give you something, or any kind of like feature in the river, on the side of the river, that you could almost like pinpoint where you were. Like, you love that. You're like, oh, I see something, like it's making like a hard right instead of like an S turn. Like, let's find out that might tell us where we are on the map.
And then when you find that, from then you have to count every single turn after. I can't figure out where I am partway through. I have to turn by turn. My head is on the map, on the topography, on the map. It's very challenging.
So it was so hard.
Yeah.
And it wasn't, dire, because we had a lot of days on this to get out, and eventually you figure out where we were. But we're obviously teaching navigation as well, and it helps when the instructors know where we are when you're teaching it. So it was a challenge for sure. And so we got into this boggy area, and we're cruising along the S curves. And after a couple of days of that, it's getting a little boring.
Mm-hmm.
And Travis gets this idea of, there's another river that in a day or two we're kind of almost parallel towards. It's probably 1 kilometer away from us. And that ends up, we're going to the Yukon River. We're going to dump into the Yukon River, which is a massive, massive river. But this river also dumps into the Yukon River, but also that does it a lot quicker. Instead of 7 or 8 days on this river, it could be 3 days on this other one.
Less meandering.
Yeah.
Okay.
Probably, hopefully, a bit more flow and a bit more straighter, and then we could have more time on the Yukon River.
Mm-hmm.
And so he comes up with this idea of like, how about we leave this river? It's like, what do you mean leave this river? It's like, you don't do that on a canoe expedition. It's like, there's never usually an option to go to another river, let alone like just leave it. It's like, look at this river over here. I think instead of 5 days at the Yukon River, I think we can get out there in 2 days. And then we can play a bit more on the Yukon River, where it's fast flowing and there might be more things to see and do out there. And I was like, I don't know, really? It's like, yeah, I think if we find this bend in the river, we're about 1 kilometer from there. So I think we can portage all our stuff over there. We're not really set up for portaging. We don't have lightweight stuff. And but he's like, we can portage our canoes over to that river and then canoe out that river to get to the Yukon. And then we'll be back on track.
And at that point, you probably had 25 days of food too, or something.
Yeah, exactly. So we got a lot of stuff. So we find out where we think we are, where we're at this about 1 kilometer from this other river, and we decided to go on a scouting mission. And before we did that, I think Travis presents it to the group, like, "Hey, you guys up for this?" Well, the other thing, we wanted to go on this other river because they were really excited about getting close to the Arctic Circle.
Yeah.
And if we'd stayed on the planned route, we would never cross the Arctic Circle, but we'd probably come within like 10 kilometers of the Arctic Circle, just below it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the other thing Travis thought. He's like, if we go over to this other river, and where it dumps out to the Yukon River, that's a lot closer to the Arctic Circle, and we could probably paddle upstream for a day, and then we could I think then we could touch the Arctic Circle. And Travis is like, I don't know, not sure how much he'd worked that summer. That was at a time when he was working a lot. But for me, I was on probably day 65 or 70 of this semester course. And Travis is doing things to make this more exciting. And, it's really easy once you get that far into it to start checking out and like thinking about what's coming up next after your course. And it's like, let's just cruise on out of this river, cruise down the Yukon. It's been a great semester. Let's call it good. And so Travis is like head spinning, like, how can we make this more exciting? So we talk about this and we look at it, I think it's possible. And so I was like, all right, you got to present it to the group. I was like, I don't think they're going to go for it. I think they're all pretty exhausted. And, so much of leadership is like how you present it to the group. And whatever he says to them, they just rally. They're like, yeah, let's go to the Arctic Circle. Let's do it. I was like, all right, you guys are going to have to lead this. You're under control now. Like, we're not pushing you. We're not motivating you. It's all you. So they got all pumped up and we're super excited to do it. And we're like, okay, well, first we need to make sure we can find out where this river is.
Mhm.
Then we need to make sure there's water in the river.
And was part of you secretly hoping they would just vote?
Yeah, part of it was like,
Yeah.
let's just cruise out of here. We'll
Yeah.
just float and bloat, eat all our food.
We've
have a
made
nice
it this
relaxing
far.
trip.
Yeah, this is sort of the reward for.
Exactly. Yeah, let's have a nice, relaxing, low risk management cruise out, and maybe do a nice small group expedition at the end with the students and that. And
Instead, we're going to bushwhack and then attain upstream.
And so we do the scouting trip. We find this river. It's not moving much faster than where we were. It's almost a canal, but it's straight away, and there's plenty of water in it for us to get out to the Yukon River. So we're like, all right, we're going to do this. We go back. Next day, we pack up camp and we get ready for this portage. I think we ended up going to be 2 trips, but it was tight, like muskeg, like small, low, probably birch trees that are, head height, maybe a little higher, and then lots of bog, lots of alders and willows and just tight stuff. I remember at one point we were portaging with the canoes over our head, and then we wanted to take a break, and we just said, okay, let's take a break. And we let go of the canoe and it stayed stuck in the trees.
Oh, wow.
Because we were just fighting through the trees trying to get through. And then we take a break, and then we're like, okay, pick it up again, go. And then we put it on the bog and we drag it for a while. And then we had all our gear to move over. And eventually we did it, go over to this other stream. And I'm kind of thinking, like, do you think we should call the branch and
let them know we're on a completely different route?
If they happen to find us? Because, it's never happened to me, but every now and then if, like, there's an emergency at home with a student or parent, like, they will send a plane up because they know the general route that you're on.
Yeah.
But we're not even on the general route anymore.
Yeah. We have completely left the watershed.
Yeah, exactly. But he's like, I'll be fine. It's only a few days. We'll be on this. I'm like, all right. So we get out to this other river, we start paddling, cruise on this river, and it's fine, it's easy river. And then we get out to the Yukon, and the students are just blown away because we're on this river that's probably like 20, 30 meters wide, almost a little canal. And then you get the Yukon River, which is like a kilometer wide in a lot of places, and fast moving and different color, like coming out of that river where you see the blend of the colors in the river. It's really neat. And Yukon River is so much more silty and gray,
and at that stage, it's picked up a lot of tributaries. A lot of glaciers.
And
it's very significant at that point.
And so again, this is north of Fairbanks, just below the Arctic Circle. And so we get out there, we camp kind of on the point, and we're like, all right, well, we've got 6 kilometers or 6 miles upstream to get to the Arctic Circle. This is how we paddle upstream, like try to go eddy to eddy. And on the Yukon River, it's not like being that wide, it's not a lot of eddies. It's not like a whitewater river where you can hide behind a rock here and there and make your way up. And so
you're not teaching the skill of attainment. It's just sort of sheer.
Yeah, it's so muscle to trying to get up, paddling upstream. So you're paddling against the current. And so we paddled for a while, and then we'd realize, okay, we're not getting too much distance here. Let's all get out. And then we dragged the canoes for a while, and then we ferried over the river, and then dragged and pulled and paddled up a stream again. And just before we started that, just to circle back a bit, the beginning of that day, I remember the one student who was the leader of the day that day just kind of coincidentally worked out. And he was a student that kind of always had a bit of a negative attitude. We've been working on him a lot on this trip, and he kind of stuck out for his attitude. And we'd had a fair number of kind of behavioral issues, but he'd come around. It was like, again, day 75 now or so. And he was fine student, but just the attitude wasn't fully embraced. And I remember he was trying to give his pep talk, as usually give a pep talk at the beginning of the day. And he just looks at everybody. He's like, well, I hope you're ready now because today's going to suck. I was like, oh no, like I thought we'd gotten past this.
I do remember you saying a little bit earlier, one of the keys to getting people on board with any plan is presentation. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. So
he missed that lesson.
He set low expectations for how the day was going to turn out. So after like a full day of pulling and dragging and paddling upstream, there was a bit of a bend in the river, and we look at our maps and we're like, welcome to the Arctic Circle. And we made it. And it was pretty anticlimactic because you look around, you're like, well, it looks like it did 10 feet below and over there.
It could be anywhere.
Could be anywhere, but this is what the map says. So we pulled all our boats up and everybody jumped in for a big swim, and the water's really cold. So we hadn't been doing a lot of swimming, a bit of quick baths and that, but we all jumped in. It was pretty muddy, I remember there. And we camped for a night at the Arctic Circle. So it's like, they all couldn't say they never got to the Arctic Circle on their NOLS trip.
That is, the fact that everyone got on board to go upstream is incredible. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think thinking back now, I think they thought the original itinerary for this expedition was to go probably on one of the northern rivers that you've done. And go above the Arctic Circle. And I think when they showed up in Alaska, for whatever reason, the branch was like, "Oh, you're going to do this new route." And I was like, "Okay, where in the Brooks Range is that one?" And they're like, "Oh, well, it's just a little further south." I'm like, "What? I'm not going to the Arctic Circle." And then I had to break it to the students, like, "We're actually not going to the Arctic Circle."
Okay, so that motivation had started.
So I think that was probably in their head, even coming to Alaska, that they were probably going to get to this river. And so anyway, we went up there, paddled.
But at that stage in the Arctic Circle, you were still fully in the trees. It sounds like it wasn't above tree line now.
It was low shrubs, and maybe some low trees, but it wasn't barren, sure.
Right, but it was above kind of.
Yeah, it was above, like, definitely above boreal forest.
Yeah. Okay, great. So you had those nice big views and
beautiful sunsets, sunrise if you're awake at that time.
Yeah, 2 a.m., 3 a.m.
Yeah, and so then we're, Travis and I are like, "Whew, we did it. We made the Arctic Circle. Let's set them up for independent student travel, where the students are going to travel without instructors, canoeing for several days at a time."
Mm-hmm.
And I was really excited for this. Their risk management, their judgment, their first aid skills were top notch for a student group. Like, they were ready for this.
Yeah.
And we were going to do it right from the Arctic Circle. And we had probably, I think, 4 or 5 day paddle out to the Dalton. What's the highway? The Dempster is in.
The Dempster's in the Yukon, and
Dalton
I think you called it the Dalton. Yeah, I'm not familiar with it, but that's,
the Dalton Highway.
Mm-hmm.
It goes from Fairbanks to Prudhoe Bay to the Arctic Ocean.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's where our pickup is, where the Yukon River intersects with the Dalton Highway, and the
good old takeout at the bridge.
Yeah,
don't miss the bridge.
Don't miss the bridge.
Yeah.
Let's paddle to the bridge, and so they were going to paddle right from there. We'd had it that they were going to leave before us and then camp, and then we'd paddle past them and camp past them and do kind of a leapfrog. So we could kind of keep an eye on it.
Yeah, you see the morning and night, right?
Exactly. And I remember heading off, and I think they were paddling really slow. So I think Travis and I decided to just pass them and go. But this was also their first time paddling on the Yukon River.
Right.
And so, a lot of the build up to independent student travel is that they've developed their skills really well, and now they can go, and it happens almost all hiking trips and a bunch of paddling trips where it's seemed necessary and safe, and they really do it based on their skills. And so they hadn't actually had a lot of paddling experience on the Yukon River, which is a completely different river than this side Beaver Creek tributary that's like a canal in a bog. Now the Yukon River is this massive, massive kilometer-wide body of water that, a J-stroke's a J-stroke, but, understanding the way the river runs, to getting out on the side of the river because they don't have as many eddies, where you're going to camp is different. And then the wind is different, and the wind can play a big factor.
The thing that always strikes me on those big rivers is if you're in the middle of the river and someone needs to pull over to go to the washroom, and like you look to shore, but by the time you actually get to shore, you are much further down. Yeah. And so it looks kind of calm on the surface, but you don't realize just how fast you're moving.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and then obviously the wind too, because the wind almost treats it like a lake, because you can get big whitecaps on the river that are not terrain caused; they're just caused by the wind, and you can capsize. And if you capsize there, it's a lot. Trying to swim to the shore can take forever. Yeah, not like a small tributary. And so we head off, and the wind starts picking up, and they're not paddling that fast. So Travis and I decided, let's just go ahead to our campsite. I think they'll be fine. And we're paddling along, and we noticed there's one village that we knew we'd pass, and we told the students about that. There's a village there, just avoid it. It's a First Nations village that, I don't know, we didn't know much about it, but it was a First Nations village, probably had a few hundred people living there. It was very remote. It was only accessed by boat or plane. And So we cruised by. I remember kind of poking our head around, trying to look in there to see what it was like. And we got past that. We were probably, 5 or 10 kilometers past that village where Travis and I camped down the river. And we spent the night there, and the wind started to pick up as we got to camp. And the wind picked up and picked up and picked up. And then the next day, there was no paddling. It was full on blowing upstream, like huge winds. And we're like, oh no, I hope they got off the shore. I hope they got off the river. And I hope they're together, because we had two groups, two independent student groups. One was, we separated genders. They decided that. So it was a girls group and a boys group.
Oh, interesting.
And we had no idea where they were. And the next morning, it was really windy. We're kind of like, we're hoping that they're not paddling, because it wasn't really safe to paddle, but we're kind of poking our head out. And the wind is cranking,
I'm assuming, upstream.
Upstream, yeah. And so we're poking our head out to see, like, because we don't want them to float by and not see them, because we want to know where they are. But we really don't know where they are at this point. And I remember that day we just hung out in the tent and started writing evaluations and doing our paperwork. And I remember the wind was so strong that it was blowing like the sand and grit through the seam, through the zipper.
Oh, wow.
Through the zipper seam, like of the fly and the body. Like it was blowing up under the fly, into the body, like blowing through the zipper.
And is this where we circle back to you have 2 tent poles instead of 3?
Right, yeah, with 3 instead of 4.
Or 3,
yeah, so it's barely standing up as it is. We've got this tarp wrapped over it. It's it's a sad looking tent.
Yeah.
If you came by, you probably would have thought it was abandoned long ago. And and so we're doing our paperwork, poking our eyes out every now and then just to see if we can see them float by. We don't see them at all. We spend all day there.
How far are you from the ocean there?
We're a long way. We're like hundreds of kilometers.
Okay.
And so the next day we got a paddle. So we spent all day there doing paperwork, looking out for students, not fit to paddle. The next day,
more and more.
Yeah, worried and wondering what's going on. And then now it's starting to like creep up a little bit of like, well, our pickup's on this day, and like we got to make up time to make it in time.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody knew I was going back to Newfoundland right after the semester ended, because I was the best man in a friend's wedding. And it was like the day after I was like, finish the semester, get on the plane. And, Alaska's a long way from Newfoundland.
I was saying, how many kilometers were you from home at that point?
I think, it was, it's probably about 7,000 or 8,000 kilometers. I think it's like 5.5 time zones.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was kind of in the back of my head. I'm like, man, if we don't get out here in time, I'm not going to make it to the wedding. The silly things that come up in your head. And so we go down the next day. So we've camped. We had a whole day there. The following day, we haven't seen them. We thought maybe they passed us. Maybe they got on the river. We're hoping they didn't, because it wasn't safe. Well, let's go down, because we can't go back upstream, because it's just not that safe to paddle, and to go upstream as far as we would need to go see them would be way too hard.
And so you had, like, normally in independent student travel, everyone has their X's. They designate on a map of where they're going to camp each night, but it just became evident to you so quickly that no one was making their X, including you.
Yeah. So the next day, we got to our first X. The next day, no one paddled.
Yeah.
The following day, we're like, okay, let's try to make some headway. Like, it wasn't great conditions at all, but for Travis and I, experienced paddlers, we're like, okay, we can get this, and let's go down and find their next X where they're supposed to camp, because let's hope they're there.
Mm-hmm.
So we're cruising down, we find, look at their spots, no signs of them anywhere. So I think this was around the point where we were about to make a call to the branch and say, we got a situation here. Just before we made that call, we saw somebody on the shore, actually, and we were like, wow, maybe it's them. It didn't really quite look like all our deer and them, but it was a long way off, but we could see people. And just
that feeling of hope in those moments of like, please, you want it to be
exactly. You're like willing it for that to be them, or like willing it to be all together. Yeah. So we ferried across the river, and I remember the waves were so big that like I was really worried. I was like, we got everything strapped down here? We could go over any time. Like, wind waves were lapping over the canoe, and we got across, and I was like, let's not do that again. And we find it's a group of Germans.
Classic.
Of course, right?
Classic, yeah.
All over the Arctic, Alaska, Yukon, you'll find Germans everywhere. They just love the wilderness, and they seem to have no fear.
Pre-COVID, there were multiple flights a week direct flights from Frankfurt, Germany to Whitehorse, Yukon.
Right.
And they were always packed.
And that's crazy. And so we bump into this group, we see them, and they don't really know what they're doing. They're cutting down some logs to build a catamaran to try to be a bit more stable.
Yeah.
Because they aren't that skilled paddling, and they were like, we got to do something. We got to get out of here. And so we talked to them for a minute, and they went off. And we said, if you see group students, let us know or tell them we're coming.
It's so classic on these northern river trips. And you're out there for 30 days and you see no one except the token German group
In the middle of nowhere.
in the middle of nowhere, and usually over their head. Yeah, usually there's an element of,
Yeah. Can you help us a bit?
Yeah, there's lots of great stories of NOLS courses adopting Germans. And,
So we went down. That's when we called. I think we made our first call because we weren't in a dire situation then, but we knew that we were running out of time and we wanted to give them a heads up, the branch a heads up that like we might need some help. And I was kind of envisioning like a speedboat coming up upstream to collect us and get us back in time and do something with the boats. I don't know if they'd tow the boats or whatever. And so we called and we kind of made the initial chat. And it's one of those things you never want to call the branch with these types of things because you want everything to run smooth. You don't want to annoy them. They're busy enough with everything and all they need is to deal with another situation. And so, but we wanted to give them a heads up. So we called and we're like, do you know, what's the situation? When are you going to be out there? Like, well, we don't know when we're going to get to the end because it's not really safe for paddling. We're like, okay, so where are the students? About that. We really don't know where the students are either.
I'm not quite sure how to broach this,
I have
but
no idea where the students are. And they're like, okay, well, call us back tonight or in the morning or 24 hours or something. We'll see. Because you guys still have time.
Yeah.
And so Travis and I paddle along again and we keep pushing and pushing through the wind, get to a gravel bar, camp for the night, no sign of students. I think at this point we forgot to give them, usually in the last ration, you have it set up that you give them a bunch of Snickers or something to go in their small group. Mm-hmm. And I think we'd forgotten to give them their Snickers. And I think Travis and I had Snickers for dinner that night or something. Because we were paddling late because we were pushing it. And so the following day, no students, no sign of them, still windy. And we talked to the branch again, and they're like, "You got to keep going. Like, we'll send up the truck to pick you guys up. You guys keep pushing."
Wow.
From the students, so we push on again.
I cannot. Yeah, my brain.
And so we're like getting further away from the students.
Yeah.
We still don't know. And then that evening, we call back to the branch to check in again, and they're like, "Oh, we heard from one of your student groups." I was like, "Whoa. Where are they? How are they doing? What's going on?" Yeah. So they said that the boys group, the guys group, was in the town that we passed. It was called Beaver. In this town, they'd end up pulling off right at this town, and they were fine. They were hunkering down there. Someone was like putting them up, and I didn't get much details obviously at the time. Or quick satellite phone calls. I'll tell you more about their experience later. But so they were there, but they didn't know where the girls were. And they were going to try to find them. And so the branch had told them at this point to stay there.
And I believe you said you passed that town in the first few kilometers.
Yeah,
so they
didn't get very far.
Which was actually smart.
Yeah, they did everything great. They did everything perfect. And even pulling off in the town, because obviously they'd have communication. So they'd heard from them. They're fine. They're hanging out. They don't know where the girls are. They might try to go look for them. We're like, great. And so we're at this point, we're way past the town. And so the branch is like, but you and Travis got to get to the bridge. Like, we're not coming. Because I was looking around, like, maybe they can pop a float plane down here or a bush plane on this gravel bar here. And they're like, no, you guys got to get to the bridge. We're not leaving any canoes in the woods. I'm like, really? Okay, it's not that safe paddling. So Travis and I pushed on. I remember we pushed on that night. It was going to be like the day before our pickup. And we were pushing, and the sun was setting. So it's like midnight or later. And there was a sweeper, a log just kind of barely sticking out of the water that we just missed. And I was like, whoa, Travis, did you see that? I think I was in the stern at the time. And he's like, no, I missed that. I was like, I think we should pull over and get some sleep.
Yeah.
So we pulled over. I think we
just dusky. Yeah, it's her prime your eyes are my interest.
Yeah, and that's, your judgment goes out the window when you're in that situation and you're not thinking clear. So we pulled over and got a few hours of sleep and then got up the next morning and we're pushed hard to get to the bridge. Got to the bridge and there's a little outpost there, and I think we had a meal or a burger or something waiting for the van. And so at this point now, we're separated from our students by probably 100 kilometers, 100 miles. I don't know. So far, like they're still on course in the field.
And you're in a diner.
And now we're we're finished, and eventually the van comes, and we talk to the branch like, yeah, the boys have found the girls, and they're coming down. One of the students got one of the locals to take him on a speedboat up river.
So they're on a wild adventure.
Yeah, adventure, and found them, and they're coming down to join them in the town. I was like, all right, and they're like, okay, and so here's the latest plan. What's going to happen is
so the girls hadn't
they
left.
pulled off. They'd left and they paddled, but they pulled off and just were camped in the woods.
Right, maybe an hour. So they'd actually traveled maybe an hour from the initial.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Not very far.
Wow. Mm-hmm.
And so this was the plan. So maybe I'll tell you a little bit about what their experience was like there before I go finish with the plan to collect them. I'll just finish with the plan. So Travis and I are at the bridge. The vehicle comes to pick us up. We put the canoe on, and the plan was for us to drive to Fairbanks. And now the branch was going to charter a plane to fly into this town of Beaver and collect all the students. And I think Donna Ford was coming up with this plan. I kept hearing this was Donna's plan. Donna was Don Ford, who's the branch director, his wife, and a longtime instructor as well, and kind of jack of all trades at the branch at the time. She had this plan because they didn't want to leave any canoes. I was like, somehow the canoes will come out. Like, just get the students out. They all got flights home. We got to end this thing. But she's like, no, can't take those canoes. And so we're chartering this plane. We might as well fill it up with people to go in. And so it was the end of the year. There's always a few instructors kicking around the branch that have just finished courses or are waiting for their next contract. So apparently they ran around the branch one evening. It was like, who wants to do a fly-in canoe trip for 4 days north of Fairbanks on the Yukon River? And instantly they had like 6 or 7 people who were like putting their hand up. Yeah, I got a few days here. So it was like the Donna's canoe rescue trip, they called it, I think.
That's a dream back, back in the day when you just had time on your hands. Yeah. What an awesome opportunity.
Who wants to do a fly-in trip up there?
Yeah.
So they put together a trip. Guys just ran around, grabbed gear, like boom, boom, boom with the issue room, grabbed some PFDs, grabbed some helmets, grabbed some paddles, and jumped in the van and headed north to Fairbanks. And we were going to meet them the next day. And so the van picked us up at the bridge, drove us to Fairbanks. Now, Travis and I are in Fairbanks.
You're days away from your students.
Days away from our students, like hundreds and hundreds of miles away from our students. Wow. They're on the river, still on course. Travis and I are staying at the Super 8 in Fairbanks. I'll never forget it. Like, I think we did laundry there. And then we went over to Denny's, had dinner at Denny's. I remember it's like the big sign, like the most northern Denny's in the world. And we just like looking at each other, and Denny's just shaking her head like, this is insane. Like we might have set the record on the distance from students to instructors on a small group expedition. I remember that was always a thing back, like stories I've heard years ago of like some instructors would see how far they could be away and get back in time. But we were obviously very far away from our students.
And, that is definitely a record-setting distance. Yeah.
So the next day we go over to the Fairbanks Airport into like the charter counter and meet all the other instructors, all our buddies that have just come up. We haven't seen them all summer, and they're going to fly in and pick them up. And we're like, we might as well jump on the plane too, go for the ride. So
amazing.
We went, and this plane had to drop some mail or something off at another community. So we went back
the classic northern milk run. Yeah.
And then eventually went over to Beaver, and so we got to the airport, and they were all there. Everybody was waiting for us. Big reunion. And we jumped on the plane, and the instructors, they all got their gear off the plane and headed down the river and jumped on the boats. And by this time, the wind had settled down, and it was fine. And they paddled out, and we got the students and headed back. And the stories I heard from them were just incredible. It just made me so proud of them. Obviously being a proctor on a semester, you've invested your blood, sweat, and tears for 3 months with this group, and hearing their stories were incredible, and just how they acted, and that I was so proud of them. Some of the stories they told me were, well, the guys went into town, and one of the guys on that semester was an older, most of them were kind of in their early 20s. One guy was in his early 30s. He was a teacher from New York, and I guess school had started up there already. And so he was like teaching a class. They were there for 3 days, I think, 3, maybe even 4 days, at least 3 days. And he started like teaching at the school. And the other guys were getting like, people were taking them around on their dirt bikes and doing all kinds of stuff that we would never have approved of. But, they were.
You didn't necessarily need to hear all the stories of what happened there. Yeah.
And the best story came when, so I was like, so how did you find the girls group? And they're like, well, we kept asking, can you take us on your speedboat? And for 2 days, the locals wouldn't even go on their speedboat because it was too dangerous to go out there. And eventually one of the elders came over and was like, yeah, I can take you now. And so they just took John, who was like the student leader of the group, just one student, and him, and they were heading off. And he talked about, I got in the boat and the guy grabbed his gun. I was like, oh my. He's like, yeah, I just need to take this in case we see something, for safety or whatever.
Yeah.
And he's like, all right, it's fine. And, John's this like really solid leader, great student from Atlanta, Georgia, up there north of Fairbanks in a, First Nations community, fly-in community, going up the river, looking for the students. And just as they pull out and they're going probably a couple minutes, they see a moose swimming across the river. And as he sees the moose, the guy starts getting his gun ready. And John's like, oh my gosh, like this guy's gonna shoot the moose. And he's like, yeah, like, get down. And he's angling the boat over to this moose, and he's trying to get the moose to get up on this gravel bar. And then eventually the guy's like, here, take the wheel. And so John put the wheel, he's like ducking from the gun. This guy shoots a huge moose right in front of him. And the moose keels over on this gravel bar, and they pull up, and he's like, okay, John, jump out, grab the boat and pull up. And he goes over and like shoots the moose again to like put him out of his misery. And like John's just like jaws dropped on the floor at this point. He's like, what is going on? What am I seeing here? Like an old student shooting like a moose with a native. When would that ever happen in the world? And he says to him, the First Nations guy says, do you want to help me get the moose on the boat? We can carve it up in that here. Or do you want to go look for your students, your friends, and I'll come back later? And he's like, let's probably go look for our friends. And
it would be amazing if I wasn't missing.
Right. I want to experience this spot.
Yeah.
So they go up a little ways, not too far, and all of a sudden they see like tarps hanging from trees, paddles in threes. We told them like symbols of 3 are symbols of rescue. So they had everything in 3s. They had life jackets hanging from trees in 3. I think they had like SOS maybe on like stones. They had like all this. You weren't gonna miss them.
Yeah.
If you drove by, and they saw them, and
but no one had gone by because of the wind.
Yeah,
the stands
up there.
Oh, wow.
And so they caught up, and they said, yeah, come on down, we're in town here, and they cruised on down. But I remember like thinking when we the last few days on the river, I'd wanted to do all this transference activities, like how do we relate this whole semester? How is this going to help us go back home? How are we going to transition back home? What leadership lessons are going to take us into our daily life? I'd had this whole thing built up, this curriculum that I was going to do, all these emotional closing activities that I was going to have to like tie it up and put a nice bow on this semester. It was like, meet him at the airport in Beaver in this town, and we fly back, and I get like 4 hours in our drive back to the branch to chat with him, and I was just listening to their stories. Like, oh well, we had a night at the branch and shared some evaluations and away they went. But they just had an amazing experience that you can never package that stuff. You could never find that in a million years. So
I'm thinking of that moment, which is always an intense moment, whether you're on the river or hiking, and that moment where your students are paddling off on their own or hiking off on their own, and you're kind of going, I hope I've set them up for the next couple of days. And never in your farthest, wildest dreams is that experience.
Yeah, it's like, oh man, so you're not going to make it to the X, and where are your students? Just don't know. So yeah, we made it to the end, and yeah, it was great. I'm still in touch with a couple of people from that semester,
and maybe that was the impetus. We did actually on the Baffin Island program. We had a really nice 5-day cultural section in the community of Kimmeroot at the end, and there was like hunting, and they would explain how they use every part of the seal. And I'm just thinking maybe that was.
Oh, Jared Slip tells a story about that.
Yeah. And so I was just thinking maybe you all were the impetus for realizing, hey, we're missing a lot by just paddling by these communities.
I would have loved to have gone in and seen that and experienced that. It's, doesn't get much more cultural than that.
I'd love to ask you some questions about the podcast.
Sure.
Yeah. I think, so many of these NOLS lessons, like you were saying, you're passing them on to students and you think, well, maybe they're never going to go camping again, but how are they going to apply these lessons into their future endeavors? And on that note, I'd love to hear how you're applying what you learned at NOLS into this major endeavor that you've taken on and you are still producing.
Yeah. I think, one is obviously great stories are timeless and probably get better with time. Many times I talk to guests and they're like, oh, it's been a while, I'm trying to remember. I'm like, that's fine, because the stories generally get a bit long in the tooth when it's been a few years past, and sometimes it makes for a better story. It's like, what do they say? Don't let the truth get in the way of a good story. I think for the most part, everybody's pretty accurate on their stories, but so just hearing the stories, and that's what really motivated me to start this, just remembering those times at the branch and just times in the field with co-instructors and just swapping stories back and forth, because in our day-to-day life in the city where I don't hang out with NOLS instructors every day, people can't relate, or you go somewhere and you're the one that ends up being the storyteller because they're like, you got great stories. What happened here? What happened there? And it's just kind of a one-sided conversation. And it's like, oh, I can tell stories all night, but I want to hear about you and what's going on in your life, And so having an opportunity to drag those stories out. And I did write this book, Teams on the Edge, a few years ago. And some of that was, so I could get my biggest stories out for my kids to read someday. But I'm one instructor that, has a mediocre number of weeks in the field, and NOLS and other outdoor educators around the world have so much more time than I have and have so many more great stories that are just lost or never shared really outside of a branch or a pub. And so this is a way to capture these stories, and who knows, maybe someday we'll put them into a book and have it even as a more of a permanent keepsake. But so I think sharing stories, getting stories out, and teaching from stories, lessons from stories are a big thing. A couple other things, just, the adventure, I always say, is not knowing what the ending is going to be. And so jumping into this endeavor was, let's just get started. I could talk, and I have thought about doing this podcast for years. And I put it up on the NOLS Talking Facebook group. That's kind of a NOLS staff alumni Facebook group, and asked if anybody was interested. And I got several comments saying, oh, people have been talking about this for years, but no one started it. Or no one's willing to put the work in. So, now's the time. And it's not that other NOLS instructors weren't going to do it. It's whether they didn't have the means or the time or the energy or whatever. But it's like, let's just go for it. And so much of a NOLS course is like, what route are we going to do today? What way are we going to go? Let's go for it. Let's do it. And it's just action. And NOLS is all about it. Like all these courses are about action. You don't get anywhere without action. So I'd say those are two big things that I've taken.
Yeah, the inner motivation and the drive. And something that has really struck me listening to your stories, and we were talking about this before, since I have continued to work a course or two for NOLS a year, is, not for better or for worse, just with the evolution of time, the culture has really changed of trips. And the idea that a small group would not have some sort of communication device, and the idea that you could jump to another river, and some of that is just logistics. Say in the lower 48, where they're mainly running due to COVID, is you can't. Everything's permitted, so you don't have that creativity or that freedom there. And so I think, not saying one is better or worse, but the fact that you have all these connections and all these folks that worked in that time where there was, you didn't call the branch, you figured it out.
Right.
And the fact that you're capturing all this storytelling and all this, just a certain set of skills in a different way, where there was a different level of, I want to say, creativity, resilience, and thinking out of the box. And so I'm really grateful that you're capturing these stories and drawing in all these different people with their, like you said, these stories that would get lost in this time period.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And, one of the things too, I want to mention, and I touched on recently on a podcast on a bit of a monologue, that I am concerned that parents of students or even students will hear these podcasts and think, oh my gosh, like these outdoor education trips, these NOLS trips, like there's such an epic on every one of these. And, I'm not sure if I want to go on that, or I want my daughter or son to go on something like that if all these things are happening. And I just want to let people know it's not like that. Like, these are probably less than 5% of our guests' expeditions that have this epic or this incident that go on, and 95% of the trips are smooth sailing, or mostly smooth sailing within the realm. And these are just the unique ones that are highlighted here, because that's what people want to hear. People don't want to hear, yeah, it was a great course, great student outcomes, really positive, we had a great time. I'm like, well, that's not that exciting. And it was an awesome course.
Sure.
When you're telling stories later. So I'm pulling out those 3 to 5% of the expeditions that these people go on, and just to know that 95% of the expeditions there aren't a lot of epics.
And again, that web of storytelling, that one person's telling you a story and then saying, oh, you got to contact so-and-so because they had a crazy epic, and they'll come on the podcast and tell it. And so there's that generation that happens there.
Absolutely.
I'm curious too, just because we have been in communication over the last few months, and I have a small inkling into how much work is involved in creating a podcast. And I think it'd be awesome to hear firsthand all the behind the scenes legwork that's happening here.
Sure. Yeah. To start it up, I had some great help with some NOLS folks that helped me with the logo and the website and getting that up. And, when I started it, it's and still is a passion project that I was doing in my free time. And I was trying to keep the cost minimum while still producing a professional product. If it's not good or people can't hear, they're not going to listen. So you want it good, and you want people to be able to find it. And so I have had other podcasts, so that helped the learning curve. I wasn't starting from scratch, so I kind of knew the systems and some of the shortcuts you can do. But yeah, the realm of each podcast, once it's recorded and I do the interview, well, it's the scheduling. So you set up a scheduler, you've got to find the guests, you got to track them down. As you know, we're not always the easiest to track down or convince to come on. And once you've done that, then you got to schedule it. It's got to work with their, time zone and time, and it's got to work with yours, obviously. And, having day jobs and kids, it's that window and time zones, that window of like when we can actually chat is narrow. And so that takes a bit of work into scheduling. And then obviously the equipment involved with microphones and obviously the computers and the software you use, that all starts to add up once you've got all that. And then after each episode, it's recorded on Zoom, and then I send it to the Philippines, where I have a guy, Ryan, there Dustin, that does the editing. So I think he's a TV producer over there, actually, but I found him through a friend of a friend, and he does a great job with the editing. He adds in the music and the transitions. He cuts out some of the ums and ahs and so's, and a little bit of the filler words here and there, and pieces it together, because I usually do an intro and an outro separately. And so he pieces all that together, makes it all smooth. And then I have another lady in the Philippines that writes the show notes, kind of the introductions for the show that I go, and then I craft and edit what she's kind of a draft copy that she's written. And yeah, putting that all together and then producing it up or posting it up on Libsyn. Libsyn is where I host the podcast, so I pay monthly just for subscription to Libsyn. So I'm paying for all these people, editing, show notes, podcast hosting, and then I got to get the word out. So I use this program called Repurpose, which allows me to get 5 clips. So I post the video up on Facebook, and it grabs the clips from there and then distributes that to the social media channels, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. And so that takes hours to do that. So I actually have an intern helping me with that now. I pull the clips because I know the story and what the interview and that, and then she helps me with the repurpose. But it's not a quick and easy endeavor. It definitely takes some time and effort, and it gets faster and streamlined as you go. But there's definitely a real time commitment, and obviously some recurring expenses.
Yeah, it's so amazing. I think something for me that I sometimes run into in the front country, or something I loved about a NOLS course, is that it was a set amount of time. Mm-hmm. So you were engaged for a month or 2 months or 3 months. You were focused, you had a mission and objective, right. And the team was focused on that together. And with the podcast, you've been at it quite a few months now. Yeah. And I'm curious, what's keeping you going? How are you finding that consistency and that sustaining energy?
Yeah, no, it's a good point. Like, you don't each week, there's a new week coming every week, and it needs to come. There's no end point. I don't see an end point yet. At some point it'll probably end, but I haven't come close to that yet, I don't think. And I like listening, having these conversations with these people is the highlight of my week. I think I work from home, and I'm alone a lot, and I'm an extrovert. I'm a spontaneous motivator, and I spend 80% of my day alone when the kids aren't around. And to have these conversations just takes me back to my experiences. I love hearing those stories, and it's really a highlight of the week is catching up with these folks. Some I know, some I don't. Sometimes when I bring a guest on, if I know them, sometimes we talk for almost a half an hour before we press record because we're just catching up. Like our time's going to run out here. We got to start. That just means we're having such a great conversation, and I really enjoy that. That part is definitely a highlight to be able to bring these stories out. And yeah, the feedback I get, the comments that are coming in on iTunes and other places that I get to see definitely keep me going, and hear that people are enjoying it on their cross-country road trips, or bringing them back to their time in the field, or making them excited to do a course. And those comments are really helpful. It would be great to get some sponsors on board, or some way to make it sustainable, that's covering the costs. The first bit, we definitely got some donations from people, which were much appreciated. Mm-hmm. And that's really helped cover the cost kind of for the first 6 months or so.
And that's still an option, right? Yes. People can head on, the donate button is still up.
Yep, definitely. Yeah, you can donate on the website. And yeah, again, it's just all going into the costs of running the website and the material and that. And, I could see maybe doing some Facebook ads and things like that in the fall as we get going again, and people come back out of the field. I'm hoping lots of instructors are telling their students all about the podcast. And so people will pick up in the fall, and maybe numbers will go up. And I've been on some other podcasts talking about this, and hopefully we'll be on some others in the fall. But I always want the numbers to go up, because that's more people that are absorbing your content and hearing these awesome stories. And it'd be great to have recurring income. Like, who knows what we could do with it. It'd be great to set up a scholarship for NOLS students or something like that. It'd be great to do more in-person interviews and travel around and do some interviews with people, maybe show up at a branch someday with my microphone. Like, there's so many things we can do with it. Like I mentioned earlier, I could potentially have a book to get these stories down in a book. So yeah, I'm excited. It's still new and fresh and exciting for me to go. And there's a whole crop of, so far a lot of the instructors I've had on have been friends or close contacts. And so I'm excited to get some newer ones on from the newest crop of instructors out there and hear what it's like out there today.
Okay, so this is the fun part where I get to turn the tables and put you on the hot seat now. So these are the questions you've carefully crafted, and I love asking other people, and I guess it's not fair because you've had time to prepare. No, just kidding.
Yes, I did.
What is your favorite piece of gear?
Favorite piece of gear? I would say probably my bug net. Yeah. Just the bug net that goes over your head. I think the first one I probably got at a dollar store. It's the best, cheapest gear that can save your life mentally.
Oh yeah.
That and the hot drink mugs that I've had over the years.
Having that bug net in your pocket too, if you say you're ready to go to rapid, you just reach into your pocket and pull that thing out. Yeah, total game changer.
Yeah, it's maybe put some wind pants and wind shirt on the bug net and you're good to go.
Good to go. Yeah, you can take on most things in the north.
Yeah.
And what did you like most about working in outdoor education?
Yeah, I love on these expeditions, we think the best thing for NOLS working there in particular was the length of the expedition, and the worst part was the length of the expedition. The worst part being for lifestyle.
Yes.
But the best part being just that you get to really know your students. I think it's so much different than guiding, where guiding is generally a lot shorter trips, and you're not as invested in the personal growth and development of your students. And that was for me always a big part of working in outdoor education. I always kind of prided myself on team building and in the leadership stuff, and just really getting the best out of students and giving them that experience, that not just the skills, but that experience of leadership, and then just pulling, going back home on cloud nine about their confidence and about what they can accomplish, not just in the wilderness, but in everyday life. And I found working the longer courses, you get to see, the investment in time and energy that you've put into them by the end of the course, or even a week later, they're showing all these fruits of your labor in their leadership styles, or in their cooking, or in their travel, or in their navigation. Where shorter courses, you might teach something and then they're gone, or not teach at all and just bring them with you.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that it's the whole personal growth side of outdoor education, and really investing your time and energy into their development in incredible classroom.
Well, there's really something spectacular to being on those courses where you can get them to that point to send the group on a small group expedition.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like, you guys are ready, you got this. And whereas, I've done some guiding before, and I'm, making sushi on day 3 and bringing them to the beach, and here you go on a kayaking trip. And it's like, I'm not losing the joy out of this.
It's a different experience, that's for sure. What's your favorite backcountry costume?
Yeah, I don't know. I've had a couple over the years. I like the safety man is always fun. Taking whatever. That was kind of, sometimes I get that nickname from my students of Safety Sally, because I can be a little heavy on the risk management at times. So they would get a kick out of that, dressing up with all the safety gear. I think probably the best, and I might have mentioned this on one other podcast, that I had this student from England who now lives in Ottawa. Actually, I've seen him there a few times, and it was in the Yukon. It was an educator course, so they were all in there. Most of them were in their 30s. We were having this dress up costume party, and he kind of kept talking up his costume, and everybody was kind of disappeared for the afternoon to get the costume ready. And then we come back at night for our big costume party, and he walks up with just a pair of NOLS wind pants on and no shirt on. And I'm like, Dave, where's that costume you're talking about? Where's the costume? What are you? I'm a premature ejaculation. I just came in my pants. And it was one of those moments I'm like, can I laugh at this? Because I'm dying, and then eventually I just lost it and I was rolling on the ground. Oh man, that was a good one. He was a super funny guy, but yeah, it was
good classic British.
I never tried to pull it off myself.
Yeah, you may not have been working there for much longer. No. That is awesome. Okay, if you could go back to any location in the field and share a hot drink, who would you be with?
Yeah, it's tough. That's what everybody says, and I say it's tough too. If I say, I'm going to go with 2 spots. One would probably be either, I forget the name, Icy Bay, or I know it's Blackstone Bay. One of the bays in Alaska that have the tidal water glaciers coming down, and you're just sitting on the beach, just staring across at this tidal water glacier, just calving into it. You just hear the rumbles of the ice falling in every now and then. 5 minutes later, you'd hear the washing of the ocean up on the beach. Tidal water glaciers are just such an incredible sight. It's definitely a pinch me moment when you're looking at them. You're like, am I really here? Is this really happening? So one of those beaches in Alaska where you can get a good view. And then there's nothing that beats alpine, like just an alpine lake. And I don't have a specific spot because there's been so many of them that I've been in. I've been fortunate to be in all over the world. But just alpine lakes, I love it. I remember last year, I think we were car camping outside of Ottawa, maybe in Gatineau with my wife, and I was just complaining of car camping and general campgrounds and having everybody around, and just the noise and all the craziness of a campground in the middle of summer. And it was a nice place, but she was like, well, what do you want? I was like, I don't know, like a pristine alpine lake to camp with my kids. Is that too much to ask? But we've been so spoiled. Yeah, we've gotten to go to so many places, and so our bar is pretty high.
And will you be able to or get to Alpine Lake with your kids this trip, or?
Yeah, well, I got to one with my wife the other day on a date run.
Oh, amazing.
Up to Galatee Lakes.
Oh, love that area.
Was good. Yeah, so we went for a run. Grandparents took care of the kids, and that was beautiful. And we climbed Mount Fairview a couple weeks ago with the kids. So there's no lakes up there, but that was an awesome hike. Mount Fairview outside of Lake Louise.
Yes.
Just right on top of Lake Louise, just an incredible view. And we're actually going back to Lake Louise camping this weekend in the campground. But Lake Louise campground is a little better than the ones around Ottawa. And so, yeah, we'll see. We might get, we've got a few hikes planned for this weekend.
So cool.
Yeah. I don't think they appreciate it as much as I do.
Well, you never know what seeds you're planting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for your time and energy, both today and what you've been putting together for the last 6 months. And like you said before that, thinking about it, incubating the idea. And I'm really excited to see where it continues to grow and go and continue enjoying the storytelling.
Yeah, awesome. It's great. Well, thank you so much for interviewing me today. It's been fun being on the other side of it. Yeah, it's fun getting that story out. Now that's been captured.
It's awesome. And now now you got to see that your questions are tough. Everyone's like, oh, it's so tough to narrow it down because we have been so spoiled with all these experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Well, I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Sarah on my expedition to the Alaska Arctic. As you heard, we did get to the Arctic Circle just barely, but we did get there. What a crazy trip that was. Definitely some fond memories. Thinking back to that trip makes me think of the quote, and this could be applied pretty much for every story on this podcast, that adventure travel is only glamorous in retrospect. It's obviously very fun to look back at these moments, but at the time they can be very trying and harrowing, and definitely wanting to avoid them at the time. But in retrospect, they're all fun, and that's what created this podcast. All right. I'd love to hear any feedback you have on this. And if you would like me to keep going with a few more stories over the next coming weeks and months, you can get in touch with us. The email is hotdrinks@livemoregroup.com. That's hotdrinks@livemoregroup.com. You can also hit us up on the socials, Twitter or Instagram. We are at More Hot Drinks. And of course, we have our Facebook group called the Hot Drinks Podcast Group, where we add updates and discussions, and best of all, some photos from our past guests and their expeditions. So check us out there on our Facebook group. As always, this episode has been produced and edited by Dustin Meehairs, and our theme music has been created by my good buddy, Darren Welch. All right, we'll speak to you again next week. Take care.